The king said slow down, but Starmer hit the accelerator. Prime Minister defies king on Trump visit, says The Times. King Charles wanted a chill, informal Trump visit later, but Prime Minister Starmer, nope, he's rolling out the full royal red carpet this September. The issue? Trump's been throwing some shade at Canada, calling it America's 51st state. And Charles isn't just King of the United Kingdom, he's Canada's head of state too. A private letter from Charles was supposed to buy time. Instead, Starmer flashed it in front of the cameras at the White House. Now a full-blown state visit is locked in, despite the palace appearing to want to pump the brakes. Canada's new Prime Minister is not thrilled, and Charles threw some subtle royal shade last month in Ottawa, saying the true north is strong and free, but of course that was written by Prime Minister Carney's government. Trump's calling the visit a fest. Starmer wants the optics. The king, well, he'll always act on his Prime Minister's advice. A palace spokesperson tells GB News His Majesty has known President Trump for many years and looks forward to hosting him and the First Lady later this year. Has Prime Minister Starmer backed the king into a corner? Let us know in the comments.
In an unprecedented breach of 300 years of royal protocol, King Charles III reportedly interrupted a live parliamentary session to deliver a scathing indictment of Prime Minister Keir Starmer's leadership. Abandoning traditional regalia for a simple suit, the monarch summoned MPs to the House of Lords, where he accused the government of driving Britain toward a constitutional precipice by attempting to override long-standing conventions. This nuclear intervention centred on the Prime Minister's controversial Levelling Down Britain Act, which the King characterised as an Orwellian piece of legislation that undermines local autonomy. The moral weight of the King's words, particularly his reference to a 94-year-old veteran being evicted to accommodate asylum seekers, left the Prime Minister frozen and the chamber in stunned silence, signalling a total collapse of the government's moral authority. The fallout from the royal intervention was immediate and devastating, triggering a political earthquake that saw 3 senior cabinet ministers resign within minutes. As Starmer's face reportedly drained of colour, the optics of a fleeing front bench were mirrored by a brutal reaction in the financial markets, where the pound plummeted and billions were wiped from the FTSE 100. International investors and major banks like Goldman Sachs and Deutsche Bank reportedly moved to reduce UK exposure, citing a level of political risk usually reserved for emerging markets. This economic instability has only intensified the pressure on Downing Street, turning a domestic constitutional dispute into a global financial crisis.
The question for many people in your party and the public is, who do you want to run the whole country? And this is a critical question for you. Are there any circumstances under which, if there was a leadership challenge to you after May, that you would walk away? Or would you fight it under any circumstances?
Well, Laura, under the last government, we saw constant chopping and changing of leadership, of teams. It caused utter chaos, and it's amongst the reasons that the Tories were booted out so effectively at the last election. Nobody but nobody wants to go back to that. It's not in our national interest. We know from that evidence what happens if you go down that chaotic path. I will be sitting in this seat by 2027, and if this long-form interview works, we can try it again in January of next year as well.
Public opinion has shifted violently against the administration, with snap polls showing a catastrophic collapse in Labour support. Viral videos from lifelong Labour voters and university students suggest the party is losing its core heartlands and a new generation of voters in a single afternoon. Critics argue that the government has abandoned its own citizens, highlighting the contrast between the £8 billion spent on foreign aid and hotel accommodation for asylum seekers, while 6,000 British veterans remain homeless. This rising tide of public anger, combined with the King's decision to side with ordinary families, has left the Prime Minister increasingly isolated and facing a coordinated rebellion from within his own party. Inside Number 10, the atmosphere has reportedly descended into paranoia and chaos. Reports of a coup in slow motion suggest that Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner and Chancellor Rachel Reeves are already distancing themselves from a Prime Minister they view as politically terminal. While Starmer allegedly remains paralysed in his office, his cabinet is reportedly fracturing into rival factions, with some MPs even discussing the formation of a new British Workers' Party. The sense of betrayal is compounded by leaked audio of Starmer mocking the King as a relic, a revelation that has horrified even staunch Republicans and solidified the perception that the Prime Minister has fundamentally misjudged the national mood.
There's been a bit of confusion over this invitation in the White House. My sources tell me King Buckingham Palace not happy with Sir Keir Starmer, that he handed over that letter to the King in front of, to the President even in front of the cameras. That was meant to be a private visit, inviting him in the summer to Balmoral for the King to discuss a state visit later on in President Trump's terms. Now, from my understanding, the King... it was reported in the Times this morning, but from my understanding, the King was a little bit cautious about inviting Trump so soon for a state visit, given what he'd said about Canada wanting to become the 51st state of the United States of America. And of course, that puts the King in a constitutionally problematic situation because he is King of Canada and the United Kingdom. But of course, he has to act on the advice of the United Kingdom. Anyway, fast forward to the last couple of minutes, and the palace has confirmed to me that the official invitation was handed over to the White House last week. And as you said, that statement from a palace spokesperson says His Majesty has known President Trump for many years and looks forward to hosting him and the First Lady later this year. And as you said, Andrew, that is expected to be September.
Perhaps the most damaging revelation involves leaked documents suggesting that Starmer's team was warned for weeks of the King's opposition, but chose to gamble on a public confrontation. Despite private polling showing that a vast majority of the public would side with the Crown over the government, the Prime Minister reportedly pushed ahead with emergency procedures to fast-track his legislation. This perceived arrogance, treating the constitutional framework as an obstacle to be bullied, is now being cited by constitutional experts as political suicide. The gamble has failed, leaving the Prime Minister without the support of his ministers, his party or the public. As Parliament prepares for a motion of no confidence, the survival of the Starmer government appears measured in hours rather than days. With dozens of Labour MPs reportedly ready to rebel and the King having successfully weaponised public opinion, the administration has lost its right to govern in the eyes of many. This crisis represents more than a policy disagreement. It is a fundamental test of the British constitutional settlement. Whether Starmer survives the week or not, the intervention of King Charles has redefined the role of the modern monarchy as a final guardian against what he described as constitutional vandalism.